She wasn't evil. She was everything you buried in a dress. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That woman you couldn't let go of, she wasn't fate. She was your shadow in heels. She didn't break you because she was powerful. She broke you because you were unfinished. Men don't fall for women. They fall for projections of longing, silence, guilt, and forgotten fire. The dark feminine doesn't destroy. She reveals the fracture beneath your masculinity and dares you to call it love. This isn't about hate, it's about haunting. And what haunts a man more than the reflection of the self he refused to meet? You thought she was your twin flame, but Jung would say, she was the unclaimed soul you chased in every woman. This is what no one told you about her. She never needed your softness. She needed your silence, the kind that let her rewrite the rules while you held the door open. You called it devotion, but it was self-abandonment dressed as chivalry. She stepped into the kingdom not to share the throne, but to become the throne. And you bowed before her, hoping it would be called love. You forgot something vital. A man who doesn't crown himself will always attract someone eager to steal the throne. Jung would say the dark anima didn't seduce you. She answered the call of your fragmented masculinity. She wore your disowned chaos like perfume, and you mistook it for magnetism. You didn't fall for her charm. You fell into the quicksand of your own unclaimed sovereignty. You loved the echo of your pain speaking back to you in her eyes. She rewarded obedience with warmth and punished self-respect with distance. You called it emotional complexity, but it was a test, one you kept failing. Every compliment was currency, every tear a negotiation. And yet, you thought you were leading, not realizing she'd built the map. You followed it straight into a labyrinth of guilt. Men like you often believe they're being noble by sacrificing everything. But nobility without self-respect is just a more elegant form of collapse. You didn't lose power. You gave it away every time you let your hunger to be chosen override your instinct to lead. She didn't have to manipulate you. Your desperation did that for her. Your need to be needed made you forget you were supposed to be whole. You weren't betrayed. You were outplayed by your own fantasy of being the good man, the man who fixes, the man who stays, the man who bleeds without complaint. But the anima in shadow doesn't want a fixer, she wants a puppet. And the moment you stopped resisting, you became easy to control. Love was never her goal. Power without resistance was. You gave her your dreams like offerings, hoping one day she'd hand you back a crown. But she was never building a kingdom. She was feeding on your ruin. What you called loyalty, she called leverage. And the more you gave, the less she respected you. Not because you weren't valuable, but because you didn't act like it. And here's the wound that never heals. You kept asking what you did wrong, instead of asking what you refused to claim. She didn't steal your strength. She enforced the absence you never dared to fill. Her role wasn't to love you, it was to reflect the fracture you never addressed. And now, the echo she left behind still rules your inner world. You weren't a victim. You were an uninitiated king who mistook chaos for love. The crown was always yours, but you traded it for attention. And attention, like wine, numbs the ache without quenching the thirst. You fed her with pieces of yourself and wondered why you felt empty. But here's the brutal truth. The hunger she exploited was yours all along. It wasn't chemistry, it was starvation, dressed up in eye contact and dopamine. You mistook the spike of adrenaline for a spiritual sign. But that ache in your chest when she smiled, that wasn't fate. That was the echo of absence, finally given a face. She felt familiar, not because she was your soulmate, but because she matched your wound's blueprint. Jung knew. The unconscious seeks what it knows, even if it's pain. So when you found her chaos intoxicating, it wasn't magic. It was the return of your original hunger, wearing lipstick. You weren't falling in love. You were collapsing into recognition. You kept saying, "We're so connected." But that pull wasn't sacred. It was a trauma tether. Every intense emotion wasn't proof. It was warning. You weren't meeting her. You were meeting the part of yourself that never got fed. And you called it love, because you didn't have another word for need. The way she withheld, you called it mystery. The way she flooded you with affection, and you called it passion. But it was a loop, a game between your craving and her unpredictability. And every high was a trapdoor, opened just wide enough to make you stay. You didn't desire her body, you desired relief, the kind that made you forget how hollow you'd become. You thought you needed her, but what you needed was to feel full for once, even if it came at a cost. And she became the cost you kept justifying. You wrote poems in your head about the way she understood you, but she didn't understand. She mirrored what you refused to face, then used it as leverage. She was a symptom, but you were the disease that refused to diagnose itself. She didn't ruin your life. She illuminated how little of it you were living. Your emptiness didn't start with her. It just found a place to echo louder. And the sound you mistook for love was your own soul begging to be heard. And here's the part that stings. You didn't fall for her. You fell into yourself and found no one waiting. So you clung to her chaos because at least it made you feel alive. But aliveness without direction is just emotional gravity. She didn't create the storm. She just danced in it with a smile you mistook for salvation. Every insult, every cold withdrawal, it wasn't new. It was the shadow of your own silence, thrown back at you like a curse. She was a mirror, not a monster. You think she was unstable? Look again. She was the chaos you buried, wearing mascara. Jung warned, the parts of you you refuse to own will find their way back through people. She became the voice of your repressed ambition, your swallowed rage, your abandoned truth. And every time you stayed silent, she got louder. She tested you, provoked you, dismissed you. And when you finally snapped, she played the victim. But you wrote that script long ago, when you decided politeness was safer than presence, when you decided peace meant disappearing. You never yelled back because you feared what you'd become. You never walked away because you didn't know where else to go. You thought enduring made you strong. But endurance without boundaries is just slow death. And she fed off your quiet collapse. She mirrored your unspoken war and punished you for not winning it. Her cruelty wasn't random, it was choreography. Each act of disrespect aligned perfectly with what you'd already abandoned. She wasn't sabotaging you, you were just too fragmented to stop bleeding. She wasn't toxic. She was the reflection of your unclaimed fire. She punished you with distance because you punished yourself with passivity. She shamed your emotions because you already believed they were shameful. You didn't lose her respect. You never earned your own. You call her a narcissist now, but narcissists feed on unformed selves. If your identity were whole, she couldn't have cracked it. But you entered the game unfinished, and she finished you. Not because she was powerful, because you were porous. She didn't break you. She exposed the fracture you kept pretending wasn't there. Every time she lied, withdrew, insulted, it wasn't new. It was a reenactment of the betrayal you kept inflicting on yourself. And until you face that, you'll keep blaming mirrors for showing your reflection. You weren't in love. You were on a mission to save, to fix, to prove you were good enough by being indispensable. You called it compassion, but it was anesthesia. The pain was never hers. It was yours, projected. You saw her brokenness and felt chosen. She let you carry her burden, and you mistook it for intimacy. But Jung warned, when you refuse to face your own wound, you assign it to someone else. You didn't see her as she was. You saw her as a mirror for your unworthiness, and healing her was just a way to feel worthy by proxy. She didn't ask for a savior. She needed a man with boundaries, not bandages. But you were addicted to being the cure, because you never believed you deserved peace. The moment she pulled away, you blamed yourself harder, not because she needed you, but because you needed to be needed. You told yourself, if I just love her harder, she'll soften. If I just stay, she'll see my worth. But love offered as proof is never received, and pain endured in silence doesn't earn redemption. It earns resentment from her and from yourself. You kept trying to fix her chaos, thinking it would quiet yours. But she wasn't the battlefield. Your soul was, and every time you ignored your own needs to prioritize hers, the wound deepened. You became a martyr and called it masculine strength. She didn't ruin your life. She just accepted the sacrifice you kept offering. You kept bleeding, thinking it would make her stay. But the truth is, she stayed only long enough to feed on your guilt. And guilt is a currency you never stopped printing. You weren't rejected, you were released from a lie. She didn't need your healing hands. You needed a reason not to face your own broken pieces. She wasn't your mission. She was the distraction that helped you avoid rebuilding your own kingdom. Stop calling it love. Start calling it what it was, spiritual avoidance. You tried to heal her, but she was never the wound. You were. And healing doesn't begin until you stop kneeling in front of someone else's ruin and turn toward your own. You called her mysterious. But mystery is often projection dressed in perfume. You didn't fall for a woman. You fell into a fantasy. Every glance, every silence, every withdrawal, you filled with meaning she never placed there. You were enchanted, not by her, but by your own unconscious longing. You were chasing a ghost, the anima unclaimed, raw, powerful, projected onto her body like a spell. Jung warned us, what is not integrated becomes obsession. You weren't in a relationship, you were in a ritual of avoidance. She became the altar where you prayed for self-worth. You didn't ask, who is she? You asked, what does she make me feel? And that is how men become blind. She wasn't unpredictable, you were unanchored, and her emotional storms simply mirrored your internal fog. Every time she pulled away, your soul panicked, not because she was essential, but because she had become symbolic. She stood in for the parts of you you'd never dared to meet, your sensuality, your depth, your need to be seen. But symbols shatter under pressure. And when she failed to live up to your fantasy, you collapsed into confusion. You blamed her for being unclear, but it was your gaze that was distorted. You needed her to be divine because you'd never faced the animal inside you. You needed her to feel whole because your identity was a house with no foundation. And she walked in like a storm. She didn't betray you. You betrayed yourself by refusing to see what was real. Her flaws were visible, her wounds were loud, but you kept repainting the picture, re-editing the film. Not to honor her, but to protect the illusion. You say, she changed. But she didn't change. You woke up, and the dream broke. That's the thing about projection. It always ends in grief. Not because you lost her, because you lost the mask she wore for your unconscious. She was never the goddess. She was never the cure. She was a mirror for your soul's hunger, and the moment you see her clearly is the moment you realize you were never really chasing her. You were trying to remember who you were before you forgot yourself. You said she was unpredictable. But unpredictability feels like purpose when you've never built your own. Every time she caused chaos, you got to play the victim instead of the man. She became the storm that justified your stagnation, and you called it love because it kept you from taking the throne. You were never leading, you were reacting. Her silence dictated your emotions, her moods rewrote your plans. But the truth is, a man without a code invites calamity, not by choice, but by default. And in her instability, you found a role that didn't require sovereignty. Jung knew this pattern well. Without the father archetype, the man stays divided, uncentered, passive, easily thrown off course. And so he attracts the woman who mirrors that inner fracture. Loud, fiery, ungoverned. She tests not because she's cruel, but because the void demands a structure. And when none arrives, she breaks what little you had left. You kept calling her wild, But what is wildness next to a man with order? The feminine thrives in response to grounded presence, but you were soft when you should have been clear, indulgent when you should have been direct, and she didn't respect that. She punished it. The more she spiraled, the more you delayed, the more unstable she became, the more justified you felt in doing nothing, and in that dynamic you found comfort. Because as long as she was the problem, you didn't have to become the solution. Her drama became your excuse to stay small. Let's be honest, you mistook your fear of confrontation for emotional maturity. You told yourself peace was the goal. But peace without clarity is just passivity in a mask. She didn't destroy your leadership. She revealed you never claimed it. You wanted her to follow, but she didn't see a man, she saw a mirror. And mirrors don't command reverence. They reflect confusion. She tested your fire and found fog. So she led, not because she wanted to, but because someone had to. She was not betrayal. She was the demand for you to rise or be ruled. And when you failed to rise, the chaos became permanent. She didn't leave you. She just stopped pretending you were ever in charge. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. She never had to raise her voice. She just had to look disappointed. And you rewrote your entire soul trying to prevent that look. That wasn't love. That was guilt on a leash. And you were the one holding it. She didn't seduce you with lies. She let your inner shame do the talking. You felt guilty for wanting boundaries, guilty for needing space, guilty for saying no. And she knew exactly how to let that guilt bloom without ever lifting a finger. Jung would call it possession, your unprocessed guilt speaking in her voice. Every soft manipulation felt like care. Every withheld affection felt like a lesson. She trained you like a dog with silence and approval. And you obeyed, not because you were weak, but because you thought obedience would earn peace. But peace bought with guilt always ends in exhaustion. She didn't demand you change. You volunteered. You adjusted, apologized, softened your spine. Every time you asserted yourself, she withdrew. And you interpreted that as failure, not realizing she was simply holding up a mirror to your fear of rejection. You started tiptoeing, shrinking, censoring, anticipating her reactions. And somehow you called that growth. But growth never asks you to become less. You didn't evolve, you eroded. And she watched with approval masked as affection. You kept thinking she understood you, but what she really understood was your emotional weakness, and she used it, not cruelly, not openly, but efficiently, with soft glances, half smiles, and well-timed silence. That's not partnership, that's quiet warfare. You thought she was empathetic, but she was strategic, and your guilt was the weapon. Not because she planned it, but because she didn't have to. She only had to be what you feared losing, and you did the rest. You weren't abused. You were emotionally outmatched, not by her strength, but by your own unhealed shame. The leash wasn't hers. It was forged in your childhood, lengthened by your silence, and handed to her willingly. And until you reclaim your right to need nothing but the truth, someone else will always hold it. You still think it was about her, but grief doesn't only mourn people, it mourns illusions. You didn't lose a woman, you lost a fantasy, the one that told you she would save you, the one you needed to believe so you didn't have to save yourself. You held on, not to who she was, but to what she symbolized: redemption, purpose. The answer to a question you never said out loud. She didn't abandon you, she completed her role. Her chaos was the fire, your pain was the offering. You thought her love would cleanse you, but love doesn't rescue identity. It reflects it, and what you saw in her eyes wasn't truth. It was a projection of your longing. You were chasing light from someone who'd never found her own. She felt divine because you were in hell, and even a flicker of warmth in the dark feels holy. But that wasn't grace. It was seduction. Not in the physical sense, in the psychic. She offered you everything, as long as you stayed incomplete. You stayed, even when it hurt, because pain felt familiar, and you called it loyalty. But loyalty to a lie is not strength, it's spiritual exhaustion. You didn't fall in love, you fell into repetition. When she left, you didn't shatter. You peeled away the mask and saw your real face, not the lover, not the martyr, the man behind the illusion, wounded, waiting, finally awake. She wasn't salvation, she was seduction, of the kind that teaches. Not because she was cruel, but because she was necessary for your collapse, and collapse is sometimes the only honest beginning. Jung called it individuation. You'll call it rebirth. Once the ache becomes silence, you didn't lose her. You lost the armor of denial, and when that armor hit the ground, it sounded like heartbreak. But listen closer. It was the sound of becoming. You didn't love her. You loved the part of yourself you saw in her and couldn't hold. Jung wasn't warning you about women. He was warning you about your unconscious, about what happens when a man confuses chaos for chemistry, guilt for love, and fantasy for truth. So ask yourself, what if everything you wanted from her, devotion, depth, recognition, was just the echo of what you abandoned in yourself? What if the woman you keep chasing is just the shadow of the king you never crowned? You want closure. It doesn't come from her. It comes when you stop orbiting her silence and start listening to your own. Become the man who no longer needs to be chosen because he's finally chosen himself. Subscribe, turn on the notifications, and continue this brutal, sacred journey of self-reclamation and emotional freedom. And if her absence still haunts you more than her presence ever healed you, the next chapter is waiting. What Carl Jung knew about the woman you can't stop obsessing over. Because maybe it wasn't love, maybe it was a possession you never understood.